What's going on, everybody? Time for another tutorial. As you can see today, we are working with the XB1 wireless controller. What we're going to be doing today is we're actually going to be modding the buttons on this. We're going to be changing all the major buttons to a different color, and that's going to be what we go over today. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to start by going over how to get this thing open. We're going to need, I highly recommend one of these. This is one of those little opening tools. They're pretty cheap, and you can do it you know, without this, but using a screwdriver is going to kind of cause damage to your controller, and that's not ideal. So one of these are perfect. Just don't expect them to last long. They are pretty cheap. They don't really last very long, so they're only going to last for a couple of times, so just be prepared for that. Next, we need the two types of screwdrivers. These are both actually T8, T6. One's a security bit Torx. If you are not sure exactly which of those to get, there's actually going to be a link, the first link in the description of this video. It's going to be a link to a set. It's actually going to be all three of these, and that's going to be everything you need to open and disassemble the controller. And it's only going to be a couple bucks, so not too expensive there. Next thing you're going to need is to identify the type of controller you have. Now there's three main types. There's lots of different revisions and stuff, so just keep in mind that while we go over this type, there's also some that look just a little bit different, even though they're the same type, but they all pretty much are going to work the same. But there are three major revisions. This one is my favorite one because it has right here, it has the 3.5 millimeter jack. It gives you a lot more options for headsets for online gaming and online communications, and I prefer that. The second version would not have this hole right here. This hole would basically not be there, and that limits you to only being able to use certain headsets that plug in here. So I always prefer that, but this is what you have to do. You have if it has this, you know, it's the original type with a 3.5 millimeter jack. If you don't have this, it is important because the buttons we're going to use here are set up differently for each of those versions. So if you do not identify this correctly, you could buy the wrong buttons, and it's going to be basically useless for the most part. The third type is the Elite, and that one's kind of pointless, and if you have the Elite, there's really no point in watching this video because that is made to be pretty customizable to begin with, and is not too much, but it is a whole different process for it. So this tutorial does not apply if you have the Elite. The Elite controller is that very, very expensive controller. You know, I think it's like still about $100. It has the special buttons in the back, and it has the D-pad that looks a lot different. Yeah, that one is the Elite, and if you have that, you'll have to figure out how to do that on your own, because I'm not doing that right now, and probably won't do one for that particular controller. So we've got all that situated. The next thing I want to talk about is the buttons. Here's a pack of the buttons. We're going to be doing blue today. There's a lot of different places you can get these. Just be careful on eBay. Most of the cheaper places you can get them are through China, and I think most of us who have eBay experience at this point know that that can be hit or miss. They can either be low quality or they just never show up. I've had that happen quite a few times. So again, if you want a good source for these, and it's still not going to be too expensive, we're talking about maybe 10 to 12 bucks here. Check the second link in this video description, and you'll be able to go to a place that has these button components both for the 3.5 millimeter and the non 3.5 millimeter. And there's a lot of different colors too, so plenty to choose from. Lastly, well, I wouldn't consider this tutorial very difficult. Working with some of these small parts are a bit of a pain, especially when we're working with the RB and LB buttons and the home and all this and the sync button. That can get a little bit tricky. So just keep that in mind. If you're not comfortable with this or you're worried about tearing it up, I mean, you could end up having to replace your controller if you tear it up too bad. So there is a third option. If you want to check the third link, you can actually get a controller just like this with the buttons already changed out and everything. Obviously that's going to be the most expensive option, but again, you're not going to be messing anything up and you know, not causing yourself a lot of frustration. So again, check that third link for a pre-made controller with this already done to it. Alright, so now we're going to start digging in. Move some of this around and we'll start getting... Alright guys, so we're ready to get going here. What we're going to do is we're going to start with just the basic disassembly. And so we've got our 3 tools in our controller. We're going to get rolling. What we're going to do is we're going to flip this over. Go ahead and take the battery pack out. Just get that out of the way. We're going to take our little opening tool, I guess you can call this. And we got to actually pull this quarter panel and this quarter panel off. Now this is why this tool is helpful, because you have to do a lot of prying. You have to really get in there and pry it up, and you have to kind of like slide it up and down to get it. Otherwise it's real easy for you to pry up a little bit and then it go back down in there. If you use something metal like a flathead screwdriver, you will easily put dings and scratches and stuff all right here along the line. It's way easier. It doesn't matter how easy or how soft of a touch you have. It's just, you know, that's just the way it is. So what we're going to do is we're just going to start trying to work this in here a little bit. You can also start up here. And then just be mindful of your buttons. Don't mush those too much or accidentally run them in there. So all we're doing is just going through and prying it up a little bit at a time. Wow, and this one was really stuck in there. Oh, and then it pops right out. Alright, so there that. We're going to set that aside. Then we got this one to do. Oh! That one popped right out too. Alright. Now we got the screws. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And these are the security bits. So this is the one that has the tiny little hole right in the middle there. That's the one that opens these. So we're just gonna unscrew everything. And then it's always a good idea to have something to put this stuff in. And where did mine go? I just lost it. I've got a little metal. Well, here we go. Just get a little something like a little bin like this, throw all your screws in. That way you won't accidentally lose one. That's the last 2. Well, that one don't want to come out. Okay. And as you can see, this top piece now is just ready to pop right off. So go ahead and take that off and set it aside. Alright, so now we're on the guts here. Everything actually still comes out from underneath, but a couple things I want to point out. These motors, unfortunately, I wish it was still set up like the old Xbox 360 controllers that just had a little thing you can unplug, but unfortunately they're soldered directly to the controller motherboard, so you have to either A, decide you want to desolder these, and then you'll have to remember, you know, where to put them back later, or you're just going to have to be very, very, very careful because those little wires rip out. I mean, they rip out really easy, really fast. We're going to go ahead and remove the thumbsticks, and that one's kind of out of place. That's weird. Anyways, we're going to go ahead and flip it. Alright, and then the next problem we're going to have here is the RB, LB buttons, and up here, that's definitely what I would call the most difficult part. So as you start to pry this up from here on out, be very careful. So this little thing should just kind of pry out, not too bad. If it's stuck in there pretty good, that's okay. Just again, be gentle, be easy, and it should pop out. Now as you can see, look, the motor's already falling out, and it's just attached right there by solder. I wish it was a plug, but it's not. Alright, so we're going to set that back piece off. Now we're going to switch over to our other screwdriver, the one that doesn't have the security bit, which is the one that doesn't have the hole in the middle. And there's quite a few screws here. A couple of them are a little bit hidden, I would even say. There's one over here right by each of the motors. On each side. Okay, now this you also should be careful with because, believe it or not, this this little module here is a module, which means that it is a part by itself. It's not soldered to anything, so that's going to fall right out, which is you know, that's definitely kind of strange, but that's how they designed it. So you're going to be careful when we pry that out. Now I'm just trying to work it just a little bit, and that screw right there is not trying to come out. There we go. Okay, there we go. Now we're just going to slowly get it out of there, and here's the little thing right here. That's the 3.5mm jack. See, it just comes right out. It's not hard to get it in there, so don't when you're putting it back together, so don't stress out about that. Okay, so now this is also where it's tricky because we can't, unless we were really going to just take all this apart, this kind of has to stay in there. And I understand that it's going to be much more efficient, and usually when I build one of these, I take everything out, but for most people, you know, that's not going to be practical, the desoldering and everything else, so I'm trying to show you that without the need of doing that. So, we've got most of the stuff exposed now, but we do have some more screws. There's a couple right here, and there's two down at the bottom, and we do have to take those off. So we're going to start with the two up here. Again, just make sure every time you take a couple screws out that you grab them and put them in your little screw holder. Okay, now this one is the one that's a little bit weird because it's just wedged in there really weird. So we got to kind of like, let me show you. Got to kind of push this up a little bit, and then the screw is actually right here, also kind of near the motor, as you can see. Hopefully the shadows are not making it too difficult to see where it's at, but you should see it. Just look for it. It looks like all the other ones, and then here's another one right here. And again, this is under the top board. It may look like it's not, but it is, just from the camera view. Alright, now we got one last one. I about forgot. Right here in the middle. And that is the last one. Okay, so now everything is detached, right? But what we've got to do is this stuff's all going to come out first, the home button and all that. So if you look right here, there's like two little pronged type things, and you can use a little flathead screwdriver for this. That's fine. You're just going to kind of pop it up and just loosen that off, and then you'll see it's kind of up and off of it. And then again, this is where you want to be careful. We're just going to kind of slowly work at some of this, getting it loose. There we go. Now the sync button on this one, this is lucky, did not fall out, and that's fine, but let me just take this opportunity to show you how it goes back in there. It slides out, so what it does is there's actually like a little notch right next to the home button, and it slides right back in that little notch, and then it touches the button that you can see right there. Okay, so just take that out and remember how that works for later. That's going to save you a lot of headaches. Okay, now this right now is put together one piece, but the one we're putting in is not going to be. So with these kits, as you can see, this is two pieces, this is one piece. So you have to decide what you want to do here now. Do you want to change the this is where the home button is. So do you want to change the color that goes around the home button and these, or do you just want to change the bumper buttons? Because if so, you'll have to kind of do the same thing, and you can use this as a model. You can use the old one as a model if you want to do that, and get it stuck in there just the way you see, because that's the good thing about these buttons, especially the ones that I get and that are for sale on those links, is they are exact replicas, meaning they fit together and look exactly alike. And then we're just kind of pushing that in there like that, and now you see this is also attached, because all we did is that little line thing, we just pushed it down in the little pegs, and now it's attached. So if you didn't want to do that, what you'd have to do is you'd have to remove the RB buttons, and then you would put the new blue buttons in here, just like I showed you before, and that way this stays black if you want it to. And that's kind of how I like it, but again, it's all up to you, and the kits you get will include all this, so it's all up to how you want it to look. Alright, so now back to this. Everything's ready to start coming out. There's no... Oh, I was wrong. I missed a screw again. Sorry about that, guys. I swear, and this is where I think the revisions of each major revision come into play, because I swear it seems like a couple of them have one or two screws that, even though they're the same ones and they have the 3.5 millimeter, I swear some of them still have an extra screw or two that aren't in a couple of the other ones. So just make sure to keep that out. Now, you can see I'm pulling out this one, and everything's just going to start falling out, and that's okay. All our select buttons and even our X buttons all falling out, and that's fine. Just kind of be careful again with these motors. So all our old buttons have fallen out. We're going to set those aside, and always keep them, because you never know, you could get halfway through and accidentally break a couple of the blue buttons, and then you're like, oh crap. So don't just throw these out as soon as you get them out. Alright, now we've also got these guys, the triggers, and of course the kits do include new triggers. So that's going to be the next part, is these actually have to be unscrewed from underneath. So we're going to flip this back over, and you should see them pretty easy. There's 2 screws on each trigger button on the back. You're just going to take all those out. And just be careful, because they are at like a weird angle. You don't want to twist this thing around and end up ripping those motors out. Okay, and you'll see once you got all the screws, that pops right out. But now we have the second problem, is that this has yet another motor in it. So you have to be even more careful about this one, because this one is even more dinky, and if you move it around too much, the wires will get moved around, and it's going to be real easy for you to not know where everything goes. So what I would do is I would take off one trigger at a time, and then immediately go back. Oh, wrong one. Then immediately go back and put the trigger on it. Or I should say, put the replacement trigger on it. Okay, so we're just going to get lined back up with the holes. Not too difficult, not too much here. Just screwing it all back together. And another thing about this, do not over tighten it. This is not one of those situations where you need to get it as tight as possible. If you do over tighten it, it'll easily crack the trigger button. So just hand tighten them to where they're just good and snug, and that's all you need. And again, this is at such a weird angle, the way they have these screws in here. Alright, now the motor can stay held in, and it's not going to flop around. And we'll do it with the second one. Oh, sorry, I was off camera a little bit there. It's kind of hard to mess with these small parts and make sure it's always every second on camera, so sorry about that. Okay, now, again, we're just going to try to keep everything in place, pull that old trigger off, and then immediately slap the new one on there. Well, don't literally slap it on there, that'd be weird. Dropping screws. Dropping a lot of screws. Getting that last one in here now. Alright, so now those are attached. The motors have remained intact and in place. And we're ready to start putting all the regular buttons in there. And okay guys, do not adjust your screens. I actually decided last second I wanted to use red for this, so I actually just took the blue triggers off that we just did and put red ones on there. Same setup, and we're in the same place, so don't fret about that. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to start getting all of the AB buttons, all that type of stuff in there. And that's what we're doing next. Now, first thing we're going to do is we got to go ahead and work out this D-pad. This little metal piece is important, so don't lose this. You got to keep this. This is just going to pop off, but again, it's connected to several different places, so you just got to kind of work it. If it's in there too much, you can get a little flathead, because there's actually like some little clips right there. There we go. And then that'll remove the D-pad. But again, hang on to this. You'll still need that. Alright, so we'll go ahead then. First thing, simple, we'll go ahead and put a new D-pad on. This does go in there a certain way. Each of the little things has a very specific piece on there. So all you have to do is just kind of keep going around until it fits. And if it doesn't really hold in there, then it's not in the right place. Alright. Usually what it actually is this one goes at the bottom, but and then the one with 3 actual clips kind of go the top and the sides. Let me get my metal piece back, and then we're gonna pop this back. Oops. So I mean, this thing can be fidgety until you get that metal piece. It's actually a little bit scary that they made these where this is all that really keeps it in there. Okay, and then you're just going to kind of clip the little clips back in there, and now you can see it stays in there like it's supposed to. I just realized too, this camera is almost making these buttons look orange from the view of the camera, but this is red. Put this back in there. Okay, so we're going to flip it back over. The kits that I've talked to you about, and most of the ones you're going to find if you go somewhere else to get them, they're going to come with, oops, dropped the button. They're going to come with a menu button and a back button. They're going to come with the A, B, X, Y buttons and the home button. Now, for me personally, I don't like to use the home button because most of the ones you get are not see-through, so you're not going to see the LED. And if you've like modded it to where it has a different color LED, obviously that's not ideal. So I'm not going to use that. I'm going to use the original home button. So what we're going to do is we're going to be popping these in here. All these little buttons have these little clips, kind of like the D-pad did, and so you can't get this put in there the wrong way. If you do, you'll know pretty quick because it won't fit in there flat, and it won't sink down in there. So that is kind of convenient, because it makes it easier to know which one goes where and exactly how it's positioned. So just follow those little, I won't go in there. There we go. Okay, so there's our buttons right there. Same thing with these. Now, again, you may not want to use these because the tops typically aren't going to have the, the letters. I mean, most people that are pretty hardcore gamers already know, they don't have to look at the buttons. But in case you do want it to X, A, B, Y, you either have to get special custom buttons, which are going to be a lot more expensive, or you just go back to the originals. And then all we're doing is we're just getting the right one in the right place. This one's the most obvious because it's the tallest one. So I always start with that one. And then it's almost like a puzzle after that. You just got to find the right one with the right little prongs. And get it turned in the right direction. Okay, so there's that. Luckily with this, it actually, the little rubber piece actually stayed attached. Most of the time that falls right off, so that's the first time I've ever seen it stay attached. So most of the time, you'll have to take this rubber piece and put it over top of the buttons first, and then put this back in there. But in this case, that's not what happened. So I'm just going to see if I can slide it on in there. Oh, and then it came off, so I'm going to have to put it in there anyways. So you just slide it over top. It's pretty easy. You can see it pretty well how it goes on there, and it just fits right on top. If you're laying this flat on the ground, it's not going to, you'll notice it's not going to fit. And then one of my buttons have been turned around. Actually, a couple of them have. So you got to want to hold this up until you get that motherboard back in here, so that the buttons don't pop up and get turned around. Okay, now we're just gonna, again, this is an easy place to rip those motors out, so just be careful. Just, you gotta hold the top board up so you can slide this one in, and then let's go ahead and hurry up and get 1 or 2 screws in here so it can't move around. And again, you'll know if the buttons have moved because this is not going to fit flush. It's going to kind of rock around. And if that's the case, just take it back out, figure out which button got shifted around, and then get it back in there. Oh, come on. Help if I was using the right screwdriver. Alright, there's one. I'm going to try to get one more in, and that'll be sufficient to at least hold it in so the buttons won't move all over the place on me. Okay, and just remember again, still do not over tighten. I just put these 2 in there. If that was off camera a little bit, sorry. Okay, so we can turn this around. Just make sure you got a good click on everything. Now, because we only have 2 screws, it's not going to be perfect. You're going to feel a little bit of play in it. That's fine. Just make sure you can feel that click when it touches, and that means you know you have them in the right place and in the right. They didn't move around, I guess I should say. Alright, so now, like I said, I wanted to keep this where the home button part is, so I'm going to be putting just the RB and LB buttons in here, just kind of get them snapped in. Now, I'm also going to go ahead and change the sync button, but again, the sync button is one of the difficult ones, because it's not that it's hard, it's just such a pain to get everything lined up and to stay lined up. So what we're going to do is, you remember that little slot I told you about earlier? The end of that sync button slides down in that slot, and then you'll see that the little knob attaches there. And then what we can do is we're going to try to work this on here. You're probably going to have to do this a couple times, especially because I know that sync button is going to probably pop out on you. But you just got to kind of play with it. And then also these triggers are going to get in the way, so it's going to help you to kind of hold them down like on the table, and that pushes them down and will keep them from getting in the way. Alright, now it's going to be real hard for me to show you, but the new red buttons, there's a little thing right in there that goes this way, and you can kind of see it. It's like right there, right at the tip of my finger, and it's going in. That has to slide underneath of the black plastic piece, and it's the same thing over here. Okay, and if that's not in there, A, it might force the buttons out in an awkward way and break them, and B, it'll definitely mean that the buttons won't work correctly. And that's where it gets to be a pain, because it slips out of those holes all the time. And then again, the sync button is going to be in the way, so we'll see if we can just kind of work that out a little bit. And then my triggers are in the way. This is why this is the worst. Okay guys, so started having a lot of problems with this little sync button on this, and like I said, this is why it's the most annoying part. What I actually ended up doing is I took a hot glue gun and I dabbed just a little bit of glue right there on that tip that slides down into the little slot to try to keep it in place, because that was the problem. It kept moving around and it's preventing me from sliding this thing on. So we're going to try it again, and hopefully that works. So if you're having the same issues where it just keeps moving around, then definitely suggest you think about doing that. Just don't put too much glue, because if you put a bunch, it'll just gob up, and then it'll do the same. The glue will do the same thing the button was doing, and it'll be too much, and it'll prevent you from getting it slid on there. So the button now is definitely staying in place a little bit better, so that's good. And I'm going to get my bumper buttons to slide in there again. I just got to get the Xbox button to pop into the thing. Maybe if I... There we go. Now it's in there finally. Now I just gotta, of course the bumpers have fallen out right at the last second, so gotta do it again. This one has just been a great example of why this part is the worst part. Because if those bumper buttons are not got that little thing in there, the bumpers won't, they just won't work. There we go. Alright. Okay, so all that is finally in there, so we can finally move on. Really now it's pretty simple. We're just going to start putting the screws back in. Start with the bottom motherboard first. Remember, there's some that are, oh, this is back, there you go. Remember, there are some that are kind of odd and right next to the little motors. You don't forget about those. If you have to, you can kind of slip this thing out of there. Alright, there's one. And then we got the one that's right there where the ABXY buttons are. Just again being careful about the wires for the vibration motors. And the little magnets on that motor keep catching this. Okay, I'm going to do one. Alright, we got all the screws in the bottom motherboard part. Just want to make sure I reiterate this. You got to put for the 3.5 millimeter. Now, if you're not doing the 3.5 millimeter one, obviously you don't have this part, so that isn't something you have to worry about. But you want to just set that down. The side with all the tiny little prongs, that goes facing up. And then you just set the motherboard back on top. And you should feel it kind of click just a little bit. And then we'll start getting the screws back on top. There's one right by each motor. Okay, sorry my hands are in the way, but it's real hard to get a close-up view and also be able to get in the little areas. Okay, so got all this, slip the motors back in. We're going to flip it over, and we're going to put our new thumbsticks on. They do kind of go there in a certain way, but you'll feel when it kind of slides onto the little part. And then you'll want to make sure, one thing you can do on accident is not put them down far enough. Like that. There we go. because the little sticks they sit on will move around while you're putting it on there. So yeah, it can be a little bit weird to make sure you get it on there the right way. Okay, so now we're just going to do another button check. Make sure everything has a nice clean click to it. And then because of this, you'll want to pull these down to test these, because these are held down a little bit by the bottom case. So pull those down to test the bumpers and make sure you have a good little decent click there. And everything feels pretty tight. Make sure your home button is pretty tight, and that feels pretty good. Alright, so all we really got to do now is just put the last case pieces on. So we're going to slide this on here, and then just remember that these are the battery prongs that go into this side. So those actually have little slots that they slide into. It's really not too difficult. And then also the again, because like I said, these are up, these have to be pushed down just a little bit so that they're inside their little casing holder parts, or whatever you want to call them. And so you should make sure that that has a good tight feel to it. Then make sure that the thumbsticks will still go down. If they're not, you have to just put that piece back on again. The back shell piece, I should say. Alright. Now we're gonna go ahead and slide the top piece over that. Oops, just hit the camera a little bit. Everything should mostly be clicking in place at this point. Everything should be pretty tight, shouldn't be too difficult. Now we're going to go back to our other screwdriver and our other screws. I like to get this one in first because it kind of holds the whole package together a little bit. And then you just, as you go, just keep on clicking. Make sure nothing is slid out of place or doesn't feel right. Yeah. And we're just gonna keep putting some screws in. Alright, and then we just put our two little quarter panels back on, and this is pretty easy. They just, oops, don't get it backwards. They just kind of pop right back on there. Not really much else you need to do with that. And you can, of course, slip your battery pack cover back on, and there you go. You now have a cool looking controller, and with nice color buttons, whatever color you want. Just give it another check. Make sure everything's working okay, and if these are messed up, then it's probably because they got slipped out of place again. You'll have to try to readjust it. You probably have to take it back apart, but otherwise you should be pretty good now. So anyways, just make sure to check those links like we talked about if you want to get one that's pre-made, or you can get the tool kit or the button kit itself in a lot of different colors. And that's it for this one. So until next time.